Now we start the second session, and I'll be starting this session by sharing a personal experience of mine. I was invited by a journalism college in Bangalore to do a session on gender for their students. And around 20, I have asked just one simple question at the beginning of the session to write on a piece of paper why they have joined the journalism course. I to 20 to 30 participants out of 40 participants said that they're entering the profession because it gives them an opportunity to meet interesting people, celebrities, and it gives them much influence and power. I was disheartened, and really very few people spoke about being the conscience creepers or opinion makers or being the watchdogs of the society to, you know, help better implementation of programs, policies, blah, blah, blah. So it is really sad that the very purpose of journalism, which is to be sensitive, which is to be part of change, that has to take place in the society, is not being seen as a very glamorous part of the profession. And the sensationalism, the visibility, the noise is what is attracting more and more of our youth to the profession. So we have with us today Mr. P. Sainath, who is exactly the opposite of that kind of populist journalism. And he has done seminal work on agrarian crisis and rural issues, and is one of the most respected journalists who pursues his calling with commitment and passion. I would just like to read out a quote of his, which I picked up from the internet, and it summarizes what he stands for. So I'm taking the liberty of quoting it. I quote, "You see it in the simplest and most direct way, the organization of beats. Many beats have become extinct. Take the labor correspondent. When labor issues are covered at all, they come under the header of industrial relations, and they are covered by business correspondents. That means they are covered by the guy whose job is to walk in the tracks of corporate leaders, and who, when he begins to look at labor, does it through the eyes of corporate leaders. Now find the agriculture columnist. In most papers, the idea doesn't exist anymore. If you lack correspondence to those two bits, you are saying 70% of the people in this country don't matter, and I don't want to talk to them." Welcome, Mr. Sainath, and I'm eagerly looking forward to a very, very inspiring speech, a presentation from you for these young and upcoming journalists who are looking at their profession and are very enthused about it. Thank you. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Let's begin with this straight away. It's interesting that in the focus, the huge focus that we now have on the migrants, there are many interesting things about it. The first is that prior to March 26th, you will not find a single article, a single study in the mainstream media, what we call mainstream. You will not find a single beat or any regular reporting of migrants. It's as if they came into existence on March 26th. Second, I've been asked today to speak about the COVID-19 and the agrarian distress. Here's something. Many of those migrants, homeward bound migrants, not so long ago, were farmers or farm laborers or other allied occupations in the agrarian society. Maybe they were weavers, maybe they were tailors, maybe they were inland fishermen. Today they may be plumbers or carpenters or whatever, but many of them who came to, or headload porters more likely, many of them who came to the cities and towns so long ago, farmers, farm laborers, and people from allied occupations of agrarian society. So while we have a huge focus on why they are leaving, what happens there, how will they come back? If you want to understand anything of the migrant, you want to understand anything of their crisis, you should be asking the question, why did they leave their villages in the first place? That is the rubric of agrarian distress. In the last 28, 29 years, we destroyed not by calamity, but by design. We told ourselves that, oh, agriculture cannot absorb many people. I have to first semester in year 2000 in Andhra Pradesh, published a report, a report done for it by the McKinsey company, in which I think the very first page or second page said we need to get people of agriculture. There was absolute where do they go? There was a comfortable assumption that 9%. Right? So we pushed millions of people out of agriculture by making agriculture necessary to function in. And it was also a movement towards corporatization of agriculture. Agrarian crisis in 5 words was corporate hijack of Indian agriculture. The second, what was the process by which that was achieved? 5 words: predatory commercial of the countryside. And what the outcome? The biggest human displacement in our history, achieved without tanks, guns, war. The Indian census of 2011 indicates there were more than 140 million migrants, and if you look at 2001 to 2011, there's a recording of something like indicating 54 million interstate migrants. By the way, those figures are huge, huge underestimates, because neither the census nor the National Sample Survey are geared to counting short-term migrants, footloose migrants, but they do count one category which is simply not being discussed. All migrants are not those who leave a village in Telangana for a metro in Mumbai. That is rural to urban metro migration. It's very significant as we are being forced to discover. But there is a gigantic number of migrants of people across the country, who are about to leave in March to go to another village, maybe in the same district, usually in another district, maybe in another state, just for the harvest, which will give them some work. So landless agricultural laborers, marginal farmers, and even very small farmers do this. This March, they were all stuck. They couldn't go anywhere. So they are in hunger. They are in very great hunger because those seasonal migrations, were not possible. Millions of people were stranded in their villages. If they got to some other place, very often they were not allowed into those villages. Barricades came up outside the villages in many parts of this country. It still is happening. And people had to quarantine themselves in the field. If they belonged to that village, they could do that and then go back after how many ever days it pleased the local authorities to enforce. Okay. So A, your census does not give you um, a real estimate of how many interstate migrants there are. Above all, it simply does not give you, neither the NSS nor the census has any count of the class of people we call footloose migrants. Footloose migrants are those who are running hither and thither without any clear final destination. They do not know where they'll be 3 months from now. And this has been the growing group between 2001 and 2011. I can say that as someone who has traveled with them, lived with them, journeyed in buses and tops of trains with them. These are footloose migrants. They might maybe get, if they leave Kalahandi, maybe they'll get 20 days of work pulling rickshaws in Raipur across the border. Maybe they'll get 40 days of work at a construction site in Mumbai. Maybe they'll get 15 days at a brick, or maybe they'll get 45, 50 days at a brick kiln in Telangana. The operative word is maybe. Maybe. Yeah. So they have no knowledge of where they're going. That is a life of complete and total insecurity. That is an explosive insecurity. It kills. So we need to look at now, many of those footloose migrants, the migrants to urban areas are going back to villages looking for livelihoods which are not there. From 20 years, 25 years ago, they moved in much larger numbers than earlier to urban areas and other areas in search of jobs that were not there. So, say the maid who worked in our building for several homes, she was actually a very skilled farmer from Talegaon near Pune. She would go back at harvest time. She would go back at harvest time to supervise that on her ground. But farming could no longer sustain her because we had devastated farming by families and small people in favor of increasing corporate control over that sector. So why did they leave? They left because of this thing we called an agrarian crisis. There were other factors, but that was a huge driving factor. And you can see it in the census of India, the numbers between 1991 census and 2011 census. The number of farmers, by which I mean main cultivators, full-time farmers, those who spent more than 180 days a year on cultivation, the number of such main cultivators declined by 20 million. In 20 years, it declined by 20 million. It meant that every day on average, there were 2,000 fewer full-time farmers in the country. And we maintained that for 20 years. I have no idea what now the 2021 census will show because of the so-called reverse migration and how it's counted and who is counted, we really don't know. But I believe that between 2011 and 19, the migrations were even more intense as you see new colonies coming up in the peripheries of the towns. So that's just one set of problems that understand who these migrants are, understand that there are rural to urban migrations, rural to rural migrations, urban to urban migrations. There are a lot of urban to urban migrants. I'm one of them. And a tiny degree of urban to rural migrations. What we have no numbers on at all are footloose migrations, short-term circular migrations. Say a person leaves Kalahandi and arrives in Mumbai. If he is in Mumbai for 6 months or more, when he is enumerated by the census, he'll be counted as a migrant. He may have taken 3 years, 4 years to reach Mumbai. He might have gone from Kalahandi to Vizianagaram to Raipur, to Kolkata, to wherever, and landed in Mumbai. That adventure of journeys of that fragile family, that doesn't get captured by any data at present. So now the second thing is situation on the ground. We are sending back, I mean, we are sending back in the sense that we made life impossible for these people and they don't trust us and didn't heed anything that your government or anyone said. And the extent to which we marginalize them comes out so clearly in the 5 speeches made by the Prime Minister between middle of March and May 31. In the first 4 speeches, the Prime Minister never once mentioned the word migrant labor, never once. Maybe because of severe criticism of that, in the 5th speech, he mentioned migrant laborers once and the word laborer 2-3 times. Excuse me, I thought that this whole country was exercised over the plight of migrant laborers. If so, it ought to reflect in the Prime Minister's speeches to the nation. It did. On the ground, we are going back to an extremely volatile situation. Nothing has scared me ever about the Kharif season of cultivation as the coming one, for which June 15, we will start getting active. I'm really terrified of the Kharif season and what farmers will sow. You are in line for a lot of trouble. Why? In the last 25 years or so, we persuaded, part of the strategy of growth and hard currency and earning through exports and stuff, we persuaded, coaxed or coerced or bullied or pushed through credit millions of small farmers into growing cash crops, where earlier they were growing food crops and living off that. Now, cash crops are piled up all over the country. I'm sitting in Mumbai, Maharashtra. Some maybe 80 lakh quintals of cotton in Vidarbha are lying unsold with the farmer of India, and at least unsold cotton lying with farmers of Maharashtra, mainly in Marathwada and with sugarcane. Lakhs of are lying unsold with the sugarcane mills that area. They're not sold. Globally, there is a huge crash in income and consumption. I don't have to tell you that. It's one of the very peculiar situations, very soon come, where in some sectors there is a fall in demand and supply at the same time. One, if you look at people growing crops like watermelons, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, most of that crop is rotting in the field. It couldn't be picked up. You're going to have this situation, and this is what terrifies me. Governments are encouraging the farmers to repeat cash crops. Telangana has told its farmers to go for cotton. Punjab and Haryana are actually abandoning paddy because it's water guzzling and going to what? To BT cotton. Now, sugarcane growers are also going to do this. They're going back in the Kharif crop. Many of them will go back and grow sugarcane again. Do you see what I'm saying? You've got millions of tons of these things lying unsold across the country, the different cash crops. And you're going to grow the cash crop again. Once again, you're going to, repeating the same crops, which you have not been able to sell because you're being coaxed, persuaded to grow these crops again. Who the heck is going to buy them? Yeah, all the cotton growers across um, all the cotton growers across Vidarbha, if you visit, or Marathwada, you'll find their houses are piled with cotton to the roof. You'll find at the Gatanji and other markets in Yavatmal gigantic mountains of cotton which are unsold. And now you're going to grow millions of quintals more. That is terrifying. Because it is a direct and terrible danger to the food security of those farmers and their families themselves. For 20 years, yours truly has been debating, begging those farmers, at least attach one of your acres to growing food crop for your family, because there's a gigantic need for food security in your families. But people, the pressures of debt, the pressures of indebtedness, the pressures of payments, the pressures of rising costs of all those goods that the human beings need, that meant that cash was the top priority. And so people went more, and they used every inch of their land for cash crop. Now, you're in danger of a gigantic food problem by the end of the Kharif season. That's one danger. The second, of course, is that people will say, listen, no problem. There's 80 million tons of surplus food grain lying with the government. Yeah, the government has shown not the slightest inclination to distribute that food grain on a very significant scale, on any significant scale. It has not shown any inclination to, it has said this 5 kilograms, or in some places 3 kilograms, free distribution. Nowhere close to meeting the levels of hunger that are rising. You're having studies coming out of Johns Hopkins and elsewhere talking about how many children or babies are likely to die of malnutrition by the malnourishment related diseases, if you like. Let me get to that 80 million tons lying piled up with the government of India. Way back in 2000, Professor Jean Drèze, when the surplus was 63 million tons, when it was 63 million tons, he calculated that if you laid 63 million tons in the bags that it was packed in a single row, that row, it was more than twice the distance between the Earth and the Moon. So, you know, you've just had that idea of having economic reform of the public distribution system. We held those giant stocks to keep the prices in the market so that market prices won't be distorted. You have 80 million tons of surplus grain with about half the world's hungry. It makes no sense at all. Now in April, mid-April, I think around 12 or so, the government of India of rice of 80 million. They have not specified a figure, but they've given permission without a cap figure to be in all, so that you can make plenty of hand sanitizer. Isn't that? You're going to destroy food grain to create ethanol for people who don't have the water to wash their hands twice a day. Yeah. And about 100 Indian districts by this time have already entered their annual water scarcity cycle. And each and every one of these people is hungry, and we are destroying food crop to create ethanol, not just for hand sanitizer, but for blending with petrol. This is the completely callous and unthinking approach to the problem of hunger, which at least for God's sake is back on the agenda in this country, which it should never have left the agenda in the first place. Uh, the second is agriculture is also facing. Now, think, if you end up with mountains of unsold and unsaleable cash crop, it obviously means a diminishing of the amount of food crop you produce. I'm saying that what should be done immediately is to persuade the government should support farmers and urge them to grow nothing but food crop in the Kharif season, if that's possible, or at least the major share of their land should be devoted to food crop. Because a rise of 12%, that 12% rise is 20 rupees. And you haven't created a single additional day of work, not one cotton picking day of work additional. Indeed, if you look at NREGA number of days that people got under the rural employment guarantee, excuse me, if the number of people under the rural employment guarantee getting work in April and May this year was much lower than April and May the last year. Soon the monsoons are upon us, and we have never had a strategy for NREGA works in the monsoon. Yeah, we've never really had a very significant thing for that. Some amount of it, but not really. So and maybe up to 20 million people are going back there who are going to need that work. Why do I say 20 million? We absolutely have no clue of what the scale of human movement is. But we have a statement from the government of India that between May 28th, 9.1 million people moved back on the Shramik trains alone. Yeah. By which time, that was May 1, people had been moving for 36 days from March 26th to May 1. Now, your number of days shown for NREGS has fallen, and millions of people are returning to that situation. Second, if you provide those days, have you thought out, have you planned out? The statement of Nirmala Sitharaman's first package said NREGA work to be enhanced with strict observance of social distancing. Please show me where that is possible and how it is possible. Let's take a paddy procurement center that's producing, say Nalagonda in Telangana, which is producing a large number of working days in a short period for agricultural laborers. Already, the shortage of work is so great that the agricultural workers in that area are working alternate days so that everybody gets a chance. Not all of them will be used at that procurement center every day. They have to do it alternate days, which shows you how little the work is to be. The work is very hard, but it's not enough to meet all agricultural laborers on all days in that village or surrounding villages. What happens? Do you know that, say, 48 people are working in that particular, and there are 7,000 such paddy procurement centers over there. 48 people handle, pick up, pile up, clean, pack into bags, close the bag, sew the bag, weigh the bag, put it on a truck. They have to do 128 tons in 10 hours, which means, my friends, they are handling 213 kilograms a minute. Every minute, these individuals are handling 213 kilograms a minute. And that's a very standard practice across the paddy procurement centers in most places. Now, to do that with that speed, 12 of you, these 48 are divided into 4 groups. 2 will hold the bag, 2 will create the pile, put it in, everybody will stamp on it to close that bag. What physical distancing will you do? Second, you wear a mask over there. There's an enormous amount of dust. Paddy dust is that white dust. I know how it sets me off sneezing. And you've got that enormous amount of dust. And if you try wearing a mask, it's soaked in 40, 50 seconds. Because the temperature, by the way, is a pleasant 45 degrees. So imagine what happens. Your mask, simply you throw it off after a while. You can't breathe in it. Have we seriously given any thinking to how to reorganize work? First of all, we haven't even found out, we have not even organized work for them. And then we have to reorganize existing work. We haven't worried about that. So that's another huge problem that's coming up. Fourth, in agriculture, distress in agriculture has also been heightened and will continue to be heightened perhaps more rapidly by the process of climate change, which we have no discussion on in this country, not in the political public discourse at all. It's treated by media as something discussed in Paris, by heads of state, and our prime minister is doing a great job, everything else, etc. So, the protocols which are there in place, it's as if you and I have no role in it, you and I have no agency in it, which is untrue. Yeah? The process of climate change is devastating the nomadic pastoralists, who you will find in the eastern Himalayas, in the western Himalayas, in the deserts of Kutch, all over the country. These nomadic pastoralists, they are really, really in deep trouble. Yeah? We know about the migrants walking on the highway. We don't know too much about them. Tell me, how do you lock down 300 camels? Try it. Yeah? 300 hungry camels, how do you lock down? How do you place restrictions on movement? How do you reach food out to people roaming, who are grazing yak at 19,000 feet above the sea level? Because the supply chains have collapsed completely collapsed, that even any serious government official accepts and tells you, though not our leaders. So you've got the problems of cash crop versus food crop. You've got the problem of climate change, which is going to exacerbate desertification in places like my home state of Andhra Pradesh. Anantapur in Rayalaseema is a classic example. Once a home of millets, shifting to a cash crop called the groundnut, which has made Anantapur rather like the Sahel in Africa, by destroying all other vegetation around it, leading to deforestation, leading to all sorts of things, and leading to misuse of water and borewells. Anantapur has a borewell bearing capacity of 70,000 borewells. It has 250,000, a quarter of a million. So you've got a coming water crisis. You've got the climate change breathing down your neck, literally. You've got a hell of a lot of other issues coming up. It does not look good for agriculture. What happens when our migrant friends go back? There are examples from your own society, from your own country, of what happened in the past. In 2008, when the Wall Street collapse occurred, lakhs and lakhs of, I would say, thousands of crores of rupees worth of orders were cancelled by Western, by Western parties that were importing goods from, say, Surat in Gujarat, where we have this large concentration of powerloom kharkhanas, powerlooms. I doubt you'll find a single Gujarati except the owners. The workers are all from Odisha. over 100,000 of them were from a single district in Odisha called Ganjam. Yeah. There is a train between Berhampur in Odisha and Surat. It's called the Berhampur Ahmedabad Express. It always travels packed, and 100% of its revenue, mostly 80% of its revenue, comes one way from Berhampur to Surat. And almost all the passengers are migrant laborers. You can get onto the train and check it out if you like, okay? But it's been done for you. So the thing is that when those orders were cancelled, the power loom owners just laid off a lack of people. 50,000 went back to just the district of Ganjam. What happened? And they went there. Ganjam had very good performance in GA. Had other, one is an insurance agent. They all send remittances to the farm, and at harvest time they claim their share. Or if it's not the old father, it's the eldest brother. This is entirely a male-dominated thing, right? So the eldest brother will run the farm, and three younger brothers are all over the country sending in their remittances, claiming their share of it. When those 3-4 brothers in farm after Ganjam returned, it led to tension, violence, brother killing brother sometimes, a gigantic increase, as you would imagine, in domestic violence and domestic abuse. It led to a general rise in the crime rate. I'm not saying it should lead to any of this, not at all. I'm saying that's what happened. Yeah, you have to be warned against it. You have to know that. You have to know what the possibilities. Possibility is the Prime Minister called this a bogus program, told the Congress that he would shut down their stupid, corrupt program, and then had some reality, ran to the reality, and 2 years later claimed that they had made the highest allocations for NREG. It's untrue, by the way. They did what they had done in the last year. But there has been no significant expansion of the NREG. Fourth, I'm saying you need to expand that NREGA massively. Sixth, you need to start distributing very soon those so-called surplus stock. Seventh, you need in the NREGA to figure out different kinds of work, different kinds of things where you can also look after the health of people. I am also saying something that I said on March 26th. Whether you are able to organize the work or not, whether there will be work or not, every marginal farmer, marginal agrarian society person, not necessarily farmers, certainly every single farm laborer in the country should be paid NREGS wages every day, regardless of whether there is work or no work, until the crisis tides over. Please know that the United Kingdom, considered a horrible laggard, a conservative government considered a horrible laggard in the handling of the COVID crisis, nonetheless paid 80% of the salaries, incomes of self-employed people right through the crisis from when its lockdown began. And your people are far more marginal, far more fragile than their British counterparts. Just shut up and pay those wages. Shut up and pay people to live. Yeah, you're going to have such gigantic problems. Further, you're going to have to invest in a gigantic national health system. In 1946, the first Indian Health Commission said this. It was called the Bhore Committee, headed by Mr. Bhore, I think from Maharashtra. It wanted the kind of national health system that the British built and that conservative governments there undermined. But it was a beautiful system for 3-4 decades in Britain, held up by doctors and nurses from India and the Caribbean. Okay, we don't have anything like it here. That would be a huge investment in your people instead of making jugglery of 20 lakh crores for 20 lakh crores for 10% of the GDP. It's nonsense. There is no such package. There is a lot of packaging. Packaging is what we've had at conference after conference of Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman. Less than 1% of your GDP it accounts for. You are the lowest spender of the big nations on a stimulus package. And much of that stimulus package will go to the corporate sector, will go to the big companies. It will not help the 122 million human beings who the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy says lost their jobs in just the 1 month of April. Just that month of April. Now, many of those jobs, who were they? 91.3 million were street vendors, hawkers, tiny kirana stores, and little dabas, restaurants. I'm afraid that 30 to 35% of them are unlikely to ever reopen. So you've got to start looking at your employment problem. Is there something that can be done about it? Yes, you can. You can live up to your constitution. There is a section pretty unique to just, I think, 2 constitutions in the world, Irish Constitution and the Indian Constitution. It's called the Directive Principles of State Policy. You will find your preamble, which everybody is reading out, and I'm so pleased that people are, embedded in those directive principles of state policy. Yeah, they wanted you to build a state, your founders, where people had the right to work, the right to food, the right to health. They had those rights. Yeah. Now, if we are going back and trying to think of normalcy as what existed before March 2020, then I think we're a bunch of idiots. What was normal before March 2020 was normal for you and me. It wasn't normal for people in the handicrafts and handloom sectors living hand to mouth, now on the edge of starvation. And not many people know, I'm sure a lot of you wouldn't be aware, that handlooms and handicraft sectors are the second biggest employer in India after agriculture, not IT or anything else. What was normal for us was not normal for those working in the factories of the urban areas, for those working for us as our maids, cooks, cleaners. It wasn't normal for them at all. And the first sign of a gigantic crisis, they showed you that it was not normal. I also want to give you a little piece of history, because I think that a generation is growing up that has been robbed of its history by people from my generation. Yeah, this is not the first time people are fleeing cities in India in a big number. In 1896, 1897, more than half the population of Mumbai fled between 1897 and 1904. It fled because of the bubonic plague. At that time, Mumbai's population was 8.5 lakhs. 4 lakh people left. Almost 50% of the population of Mumbai left. They were migrant laborers, largely from mill workers, and most of the mill workers were from the Konkan region of Maharashtra. They left. By the way, significant numbers of them came back. The reason why people came back then and why people will slowly come back now, maybe not in the same numbers, but they will, because we destroyed all options in the countryside. What options do they have? Already I am seeing that as people go back to Bihar and UP, new people are actually coming in. It's not visible to many people yet, but it's happening that people are picking up and coming back because they are driven by hunger, they're driven by desperation. Agriculture has tanked, or their allied professions have tanked. They have to do that. What happened in Mumbai, that by 1914 or so, people started returning, even though the bubonic plague didn't leave, was not eradicated, it vanished actually, by till 1914. A group of, the mill owners were divided, okay? One group of slightly more enlightened capitalist owners, led by Nauroz Ji Wadia, said, look, the way of bringing them back is to offer better conditions, better work, some kind of housing. And that's how Bombay's chawls began to come into being. The British government passed a law, created a trust called the Bombay Improvement Trust, City of Bombay Improvement Trust, which built some housing, though they probably demolished more housing, more dwellings than they built, but they built something. If you want people to come back, you want people to have their jobs, you're going to have to create decent work. You're going to have to respect people's rights. Instead of which, we are using this opportunity to squeeze labor further by suspending labor laws in many states, by increasing the number of workers working hours from 8 to 12. This is the situation. You need to implement, if you're going to approach this problem as normal before 2020, and you're going to think that you're going to do it with your old development strategies, I have news for you. That was development for you and me. Yeah, it wasn't normal for the bulk of this country's poor. It wasn't normal at all. Their lives have never been normal. The very condition of being poor, of being deprived, of suffering deprivation means that you are not normal and that your life is not normal. I think that if you want to approach any of these issues, you want to look at those problems. By the way, I invite you to look at People's Archive of Rural India, which I edit, which I founded. There's a laborer for you carrying 450 pounds on a bicycle of bamboo, 200 kilograms. The bamboos are 42 to 45 feet long on a 4.5-foot cycle. But anyway, that's the People's Archive of Rural India Online, one word, ruralindiaonline.org. We didn't discover laborers, migrant laborers on March 26th. They cover them around the year. The biggest section in Pari is called the Rural in the Urban, which is about migrants. We cover them 365 days a year and therefore have some understanding of the complexity of these problems. And I am saying, and we are saying, you want to address these issues at all. It's not going to be in terms of this development strategy or that development strategy. Have your strategies, play in your sandbox, that's fine with me. But approach these issues if you want to have any hope of dealing with them and averting a much larger catastrophe than what we've seen. Then approach these issues through a framework of justice and rights. Food justice, health justice, right to work. And all of these are embedded in your constitution. By doing what I'm asking you to do, you would be honoring and upholding the Constitution of India. 3 Supreme Court judgments in the last 40 years, the last by Justice Ashok Ganguly, say the directive principles of state policy may not be enforceable like the fundamental rights, but they are every inch as important. The Constitution itself says these principles may not be enforceable in a court of law, but they are fundamental to the governance, that they inform the governance of the country. That's what the Constitution says. So whether you're a journalist, an activist, a teacher, a intellectual of various fields, a doctor, whoever you are, approach these issues. Yeah? Approach these issues through the framework of justice. The media are an extremely unjust, unequal, and profiteering sector in the last 25 years. We moved from a tradition of journalism that I'm very proud of. I have never wanted to be anything but a reporter in Indian journalism. I never took up offers of chief of bureau of a international magazine in this country because it's so bloody boring to do that. It is such an incredible country to report and an incredible countryside. 833 million people speaking 780 living languages, a diversity that you can never describe. Yeah, such a fantastic place, and a media tradition which till 30 years ago tried connecting with the world, had organic links with the world. Your journalists were Mahatma Gandhi, Ambedkar, Bhagat Singh. Yeah, not many people know Bhagat Singh was a professional journalist, and he wrote in 4 languages. He wrote in 4 languages, yeah, and was learning a 5th. And all this by the time he was hanged at age 23. I began journalism at age 23. Yeah, I'm saying, look at the kind of inspiring things that have happened in Indian journalism, and then look at it in the last 25, 30 years. You don't think it's journalism at all. I don't. I believe there are now 2 schools of journalism. There is journalism and there is stenography. And what you are seeing practiced in the corporate media is largely stenography, and it is stenographers, and they are stenographers to the powerful. Yeah, they're not even good courtroom stenographers who record all sides. They are stenographers to the powerful. So if you also need to revive justice in terms of what people's right to knowledge, to information means on every front. What am I asking you to do? I'm asking you to honor and respect the Constitution of India that came out of the freedom struggle. Approach these issues. In the previous session and the closing, you mentioned Kudumbashree, the group. That is the group that taught me the concept of food justice. When they told me, they actually theorized it so brilliantly, saying food security, food sovereignty are very limited concepts. You can have them and still have great hunger. You can have food sovereignty, yeah, and people starving. You can have food security at an understood notional median level or average level and people hungry. Food justice would mean that those who grow food, the producers, should never go hungry, but which is what has been happening in 30 years. The Kudumbashree example also gives you ways of doing things differently, which say the principles which I hope non-governmental, non-profit organizations adopt, rather than becoming service delivery arms of government. The principle is we work with governments, never for governments. I think that's brilliant. In fact, I've appropriated it for Pari. The concept of food justice is something I think also applies to health sector, to the health justice. It applies to almost every major sector marked by deprivation and poverty in this country. So my thing is, you want to do this, you want to start doing something about it. If as journalists you want to do something about it, do what Pari does. Our slogan, our motto, the everyday lives of everyday people. We don't report celebrities. We don't even report much on intermediaries or saintly individuals transforming the countryside. We write about the lives of everyday people. We tell their stories through their voices. You will find that far more than experts, ordinary people are quoted. We do quote experts, but we put them in their place and don't give them an overweening weightage. Today, if there's a drought in Bid, Osmanabad, reporters descending on the place, the first place they will go and the last place they will go is for a quote, comment and understanding and backgrounding from the district collector, who may be someone from Rajasthan who arrived in Maharashtra 3 months ago, arrived in his post 3 months ago and knows nothing about the district. For us, sources are those, the farmer who has tilled the land for 40 years, she knows a hell of a lot more about the farm crisis than you and I do, and then more than the collector does. We need to reorient our entire approach, putting that we do journalism centered around people, their voices, their lived experience, their voices. All this you're going to be able to do if you function through a framework of justice and rights. Even the famous Prabhat Patnaik quote, which I leave you with, in debating John Galbraith's, Galbraith said, the economist Galbraith said, we must have growth with justice. Prabhat said, not possible. You need to have growth through justice. Work for that justice, you'll have a different kind of growth altogether. Yeah. So your framework needs to be around justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sainath ji, for the hard-hitting presentation. They provided a very nuanced interpretation of the migrant crisis and its roots in agrarian distress of the past decades. The political, economic ideologies and self-interest of this global economy is marginalizing more and more poor and disempowered people. Time media moves beyond human interest stories and shows a mirror to our industrialists, policymakers, and political leaderships when it comes to migrant crisis. As Manisha ji said so beautifully in her session a day before, and as you have reiterated in your presentation, if you are in doubt, democratize, go to people. People live realities which will tell you what the situation is. Thanks a ton once again for accepting our invitation and for that very frank and powerful message to the students who are here listening to you. So I now request Shiny to please start the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharda.
Shiny, would you maybe take 3 questions at one time and then we answer those?
Okay, you read out all the questions, Shiny.
Sure.
3 at a time, we can handle.
Okay. Okay, I think we have time, limited time, so we'll take 4. So the first question is, women are not even considered as farmers, let alone their issues be brought to the fore. How would you suggest it should be dealt with? And what are the strategies that we could plan to address it? The second question is, the government approach has mostly been about finance, so cash crops in place of food crops. And even the farmers get easily coaxed because officials talk money. How can we make the government responsible, and how can we as students get involved in this process? The third question is, should I go ahead, Mr. Sainath? Yeah, okay. Agricultural sector employs more than 60% of our working population. And with the reverse migration now, it is quite inevitable that they will start working back into agricultural sector. Should the government work on agricultural reforms that opens up the market and makes trade easier and profitable? Or should it give emphasis on setting up MSME or large industries in these 3-tier and 2-tier cities? Should I also address the last question, Mr. Sainath? So you can probably address all of them together. Last question would be, what's your advice to the future journalists to help narrow down the gap between the urban and the rural society when the mainstream media is influenced by politics and its main focus has been on TRPs? Over to you, Mr. Sainath.
Yeah. Thanks. The first of those questions is simply the most obvious reality standing out in farming and in every other sector of this country. Yeah. I have at the annual meeting earlier this year of the Institute of Advanced Women's Studies of Indian Association of Women's Studies, I had mentioned that thousands and thousands of women farmers committing suicide have not been recorded as farmers at all. And therefore, the figure of farmers' suicides, horrible enough as it is, 3,15,000 in 2 decades, is hugely an underestimate because it excludes most of the women, not all, but it excludes most of the women farmers who committed suicide. It only counts those women farmers who have land in their name. Yeah. Actually, the official practice is violative of the census definition of farmer. The census definition of farmer does not ascribe a gender to the farmer. The census says someone operate, it does not even appropriate it doesn't even assign a land size or holding size. It says anyone operating a plot of land, 180 days, their primary income from that is a farmer. It need not be a male, it need not be an owner, it can even be leased, whatever it is. But in practice, the government of India's administrative machinery counts as farmers only those who have the land in their name. So thousands and thousands of tenant farmers who are not recorded, who commit suicide, tend to get excluded. Women farmers, how many women have land in their name? There are 2 estimates I know of. One is less than 12%, one is less than 8%. One is a maximum of 8% of women have land in their own names. So they're not going to get, I have been present when the Tehsildar's office or whoever it was, or a cop, came to interview, say, the widow of a farmer who committed suicide. He will not ask her any question other than one. Patta dikao. In Maharashtra, Sat Bara. That's what they will tell her. Now, the fact is, the male farmer committed suicide, yeah, but she was the farmer of the household. 60% of the damn work on the farm was hers. He should be addressing her as a farmer. Yeah. But women are not farmers in our society. They are farmers' wives, or farmers' widows, or farmers' daughters, or farmers' sisters. We simply, it is a most regressive and, it is simply obnoxious, but that's in some levels who we are. So you need to change that. Now, by the way, that's not going to be changed by your APMC reforms or any such thing. It's not even going to touch that. It's going to make it a lot worse. Yeah, because it's accepting the existing gender, class, and caste distinctions and going ahead with corporatization. So it entrench existing inequalities and enhance new ones. Unless you have, there again I come back to it, you're not going to approach this, if you're going to fail if you approach this through any process other than justice. Yeah, there is, gender justice is a very important concept. Yeah, if you're not going to address that point of gender justice in the equal rights of women to land ownership, in the equal, there were some states which in redistributed land assigned pattas only as joint pattas. That was a good step, but I think 1 or 2 states out of 20, out of 29 actually practiced it. And others didn't even adopt that law. So this is, the thing is this, that you cannot change that without changing the entire issue of ownership of land. And I, question about agriculture sector reforms together with this. I think there are very few words that have been more abused, misused, and corrupted in the late 20th century and early 21st than the word reform. Labor reform used to mean improving the conditions of workers. It meant improving the working place conditions in which people work to give them a decent atmosphere, proper breathing. The 8-hour day came as a labor reform. Today, labor reform means the right of the owner to hire and fire. Yeah, ordinances have been passed saying that workers cannot form unions, that workers cannot, that workers will have to work 12 hours, and 3 states, BJP ruled states, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, are not even going to pay overtime for the extra 4 hours from a people who are hungry and starving. They're going to pay them pro rata for those 4 hours as well as they would for the other 8 hours. But agricultural reform is reform for the corporate sector, for the elite, not for the agriculturist. Land reform had an entirely different meaning. It created millions of smallholders in states like Kerala and Bengal. It created those small owners. Yeah, that is land reform. Abolishing the feudal elements, vestiges of that. A full-blooded land reform in the countryside is a revolutionary step. You're not going to see this government do that. It is going to do the opposite. And why? No, why this government? You did not see the UPA government of Dr. Manmohan Singh do anything. That was the government that brought in your SEZs Act, acquired millions of acres of, I don't know how many lakhs of acres of land forcibly from the peasantry. So governments working in the framework which we thought was normal are not going to do a damn thing about it. You want a full-blooded agrarian land reform that's going to come through mass movements and mass struggles and no other way, which is the way it came everywhere else that it did in the country. It came through mass movements, it came through mass struggle. Now, retaining these structures and talking about reforms, APMC reforms, what you've done is literally hand it over to the corporate sector. I was, it was bizarrely entertaining to watch a government official say, now a farmer in Tamil Nadu can sell his produce in Uttar Pradesh if he wants to. Oh, sure he wants to. And 84% of your farmers are small and marginal. Yeah. So they're just going to pick up their bag, be rejected at Toothukudi. They don't think the price is good and they're going to walk to Uttar Pradesh, right? Yeah. They're going to do that. No, they're going to give it, they're going to surrender it to wholesale chains, to supply chains. They're going to surrender it at a pathetic price. And the gain and the value will be taken by those who control that all India network. In other words, that freedom to sell anywhere is not the freedom of that time, or it's just in the way. Freedom of press in this country doesn't mean a damn in terms of freedom of the journalist. It means freedom of the media, which in the last 4 weeks have sacked and laid off, retrenched more than 1,000 journalists. The Hindustan Times alone, over 150 or 27% of its staff. The Times, no one knows how they work, but it's a very significant number. Vikatan in Tamil Nadu have sacked more than 175 journalists, a single chain. Yeah. So I'm trying to tell you that this idea of reform, whose reform? In favor of whom? All that's happening now in that agrarian sector is going, what is being called reform, is going to deepen the crisis of the agrarian sector tremendously. And it is people to grow cash crop again, right? Not me. So these are their ideas of reforms. We are headed for a terrible, terrible situation. About finance and place of food crop and farmers being seduced. Please understand that farmers are under terrible pressure. What has been, many were shifted from food crop to cash crop by subsidies, by coercion, by coaxing, by using credit as an instrument. And intellectually by justifying this, as the World Bank and the IMF have done for 3 decades, poor countries should grow cash crops, because those days, 80s, 90s, food crop prices were very low. Yeah. And Canada and US were producing enough to feed the world, which of course, they never looked at the fact that it would make the world dependent on the United States and Canada. Yeah. Today we talk about make in India. But the fact is that millions of people were shifted. Why did those farmers go for cash? Not only cash crop, but for anything that gave them a little more cash. They went for that because of the incredible bankruptcy, the incredible distress heaped on them by a system that changed the rules of agriculture entirely. Today in agriculture, what does the farmer control? Farmer after farmer has asked me across the country, why do you call us farmers? What do we control? Who controls seed? Farmers or corporations? Who controls pesticide? Farmers or corporations? Who controls fertilizer? Farmers or corporations? There have been 500, 600% increases in cultivation costs as corporations have taken over the agricultural sector. I can give you that in specific crops if you like, but this is what has happened. So what you're watching is a reform favoring the rich, favoring the ruling elites, and that is one. So the finance question, you know, how sad it is that we create a brilliant report headed of force, the National Commission for Farmers submitted 5 volumes between 2004 and 2006, producing the first, possibly the first blueprint of Indian agriculture. Please read it to know what kind of reforms you really free. It's online. You'll find it in the MSSR website. You'll find it in the website of People's Archive of Rural India. All the reports of the National Farmers Commission. In November, since 2018, I've been demanding that we have a 3-week session of Parliament exclusively to discuss agrarian distress. I am now saying we need a full session of Parliament, maybe the monsoon or winter session, to discuss nothing but mass distress, of which the agrarian distress is a major part. Please read the Swaminathan Commission reports, the National Farmers Commission reports. There's a hell of a lot about finance, interest rates, the whole works. We have many guidelines on how to do it. And that's why I'm saying again, you're going to have to do it through making it an issue of justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Sainath, for your time. I'm sure all of us are actually grappling with all the realities that you have just shared.
Please,
Sorry. Yeah, I request Dr. Sharda to please share her concluding remarks, and would request everyone to please switch on their videos for a group picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sainath, and I hope all the participants have got their answers for the questions that they have raised. I know that we were not able to take all the questions and observations which are there on the chat box because of paucity of time. But I'm sure overall you have got an understanding of how to approach this issue and the hard work that you have to put in reading, understanding, and then having that commitment to justice and fairness when you're reporting on issues such as these. So with these, now we come to the conclusion of this session. Once again, a very big thank you to Mr. Sainath from all of us, from Population First, UNFPA, the participants. And we look forward to more interaction with you, more guidance to our students, because you are a role model for many of us, and it's so very important to be rooted and to have that kind of a commitment to do for justice and fairness. So thanks once again. Over to Swati for the concluding announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharda. We would like to once again thank Ms. Sujata Karthikeyan and Ms. Kusum Balsaraf for the much needed perspective on how SHGs can have and will continue to play a significant role in responding to the COVID crisis, not just in the context of health, but also in the context of the overall community well-being. And once again, a big thank you to Mr. Sainath for such an inspiring session and helping us understand how the migration crisis is connected to the agrarian distress and how consequently this pandemic is impacting not only our food security, but is also impacting the people who feed us, our farmers. We thank you. We thank our partners and collaborators at UNFPA and our entire Population First team, and all the participants for joining us and enriching the session further with your questions and observations. Just wrap up instructions or details. As you all know, we have a survey going on, the boys locker room survey, which is to understand the young boys' response to misogyny and on social media. So we will be putting up a link on the chat box and also sharing it with you on your sending it to your emails. We really encourage you to share the link with all your friends and family members and get as many responses as possible. As for the blog competition, as Dr. Sharda today mentioned, now it is open to all the students. So we are so glad that you all will be able to participate in it now. The deadline is 25th of June 2020. You can write it in both Hindi and English. Word limit is 500 to 750 words on either child marriages, pre-birth sex selection, or female genital mutilation. Please send in your entries at trainings.popfirst@gmail.com, and we hope you all will actively participate in it. See you all tomorrow by 10:50 a.m. for the last day of our course. And just a reminder that the last session will for tomorrow will have a half an hour extension period because we would like to wrap up and have a small valedictorian session. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and have a good day.